Hey everyone, welcome to The Last Senate, a series about people who, in their fight for power, glory, and money, did what no one had done before them. A step-by-step guide to destroying a republic. Episode 1, The First Man Who Led Legions Against Rome. Let's travel back in time. 88 BC, January 1st. He's not old yet, but not young either. He's 50. He basks in the rays of glory and universal adoration. At the head of a triumphal procession past cheering crowds, the new consul of this year walks up the Capitoline Hill to take office. Somewhere to the east lie the Esquiline Gates, leading from the city to the south. Along this road he should depart for war against the last great Greek king, Mithridates of Pontus, and return from there, already a legend. Finally become the first man in Rome. A few months later he stands on the other side of the Esquiline Gates. He's clad in armor, and behind him are his troops. In a few minutes he'll give the order, and Roman legions will, for the first time in Rome's almost 700-year existence, storm the Eternal City, the city that hates him. His name is Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Episode 1, The First Man Who Led Legions Against Rome. Let's find out how this happened. A year before, in 89 BC, and just to be clear, this is before Christ, so we're counting backwards, Rome is fighting an extremely difficult and tedious social war, essentially a civil war. They're fighting the Italian peoples inhabiting the Apennine Peninsula. Altogether, these peoples are called Italics. Once upon a time, they fought Rome for power in Italy, but that was long, long ago. For many years, even centuries, they've been loyal vassals of Rome, and they fight in all its wars. Originally, the system was supposed to work something like this. We, that is, Rome, protect all of Italy from various Gauls, Iberians, and barbarians, and you supply us with troops so we can protect you too. But time passed, and Rome fought further and further and further away. And the Italian allies didn't really understand why they had to supply troops to the Roman army to fight and die for the glory of Rome in Spain, Gaul, Macedonia, and who knows where else. What's in it for us? Besides, power throughout Italy belongs to Roman citizens. They're the ones who elect politicians, receive income from public lands, form courts, and so on. The Italics make up more than half of the Roman armies, but outside their reservations, they have almost no rights. The situation reached a dead end. On one hand, the Italics demanded Roman citizenship under threat of war, and on the other, the vast majority of Roman citizens didn't want to share their income and status. They were blinded by greed and arrogance. Well, more precisely, rich Romans were blinded by greed and poor ones by arrogance. The lowest Roman, who had absolutely nothing, felt superior to any Italic. After all, he was a citizen of great Rome. You know, a respected person. So naturally, it all spilled into war. Extremely difficult and ruinous. To show you the level of desperation, at the very beginning of the war, a Roman consul dies along with his entire army. By custom, the consul is solemnly brought to Rome for burial, and the city is engulfed in such terrible depression, despair, and fear. Everyone, literally everyone, thinks the city is already doomed. The Senate came up with an original solution. They decided to bury the dead immediately, rather than bring ceremonial processions to Rome, to avoid undermining the already weak morale. Basically, if something happens, bury them there. No need to spread panic here. But gradually, the war reached a turning point. Rome won several victories and used their old favorite formula: divide and conquer. They passed two laws. First, they granted the desired citizenship to those who hadn't participated in the war at all, then to those who laid down their arms within 60 days. Most of the Italics surrendered. The most stubborn continued to fight and would fight for another year, but after the campaign of 89 BC, it became clear that Rome had won again, Although by the war's end, they gave the Italics the rights they'd fought so hard for, so it was a victory with, shall we say, a certain aftertaste. Rome won, sort of, but Romans wouldn't be Romans if they didn't pull a fast one. They assigned all the Italics to either 8 or 10 specially created new tribes. What's a tribe? A tribe is an association of Roman citizens. Well, originally, obviously, tribe meant clan. In elections, they collectively have one vote. Voting in Rome wasn't equal at all. There were 35 tribes total, and every Roman belonged to one of them. In elections, all citizens present would split into their tribes and vote for or against a law, or a candidate. Afterward, votes were counted within each tribe, and a simple majority decided for everyone. So the more people in a tribe, the less, let's say, the specific weight of each citizen. And by the way, that's exactly why all freedmen were enrolled in one of 4 urban tribes, so that former slaves and their descendants could never, ever determine Rome's policy. Basically, the fewer people in a tribe, the more influence on politics. By stuffing all the Italics into the last 8 or 10 tribes, the Romans diluted their votes. Simple math. All citizens of the old tribes gave a total of 35 votes. All Italics, 8 or 10. And no law, no candidate from the Italics would ever get enough votes, unless supported by the old, that is, the real, respected Romans. So, essentially, the respected real Romans were trying with all their might to preserve the old order. During this war, Sulla's star shone brilliantly. He conducted an amazing military campaign in southern Italy in 89 BC, and after the battle at the walls of Nola, his legionaries presented him with the grass crown, the highest and rarest of the Republic's military awards. This is a crown that soldiers wove from grass on the battlefield and presented to a commander or officer whose personal actions saved an entire legion or army. Throughout Rome's centuries-long history, we can count on 2 hands the Romans we know received this award. In short, it was insanely cool. And unsurprisingly, Lucius Cornelius Sulla's popularity, both among soldiers and in Rome, soared to the heavens. He easily won the election, paired with Quintus Pompeius Rufus, whose only distinction was that he was probably a redhead. Rufus means red-haired. So our crowd and army favorite, Lucius, along with his red-haired colleague, achieves the consulship. He's a patrician from an ancient but very poor family. He didn't even have money to start a political career, and only a lucky combination of circumstances and his personal talents raised him to the top of Roman society. He's still not very rich, and Rome lies in deep crisis. The treasury is empty, all Romans are in debt, and war with Mithridates is at the door. He's already begun military action against Romans in Asia. Sulla tries to heal the economy and find money for the war, and then, at his doorstep, appears a people's tribune, Publius Sulpicius, a famous Roman lawyer, old friend of his red-haired colleague, and Lucius's longtime ally in the fight for Italian political rights. Yes, Sulla once advocated for granting citizenship rights to Italics, hoping to avoid a ruinous war. Sulpicius thinks it's time to eliminate the injustice. He's running around with his program for fair distribution of Italics among the 35 tribes, noble and just. But here's the thing. There are far more Italics than Romans. If Sulpicius passes this law, they'll be grateful to him specifically. They'll support him in everything and become huge political capital. And what does Sulla get? Well, he'll lose Roman support and gain their hatred. Not quite an equal exchange, right? So Sulla, along with Rufus, refuses Publius their support. You might say Sulla could propose this law himself, and then the Italics would be grateful to him. Not quite. See, back then in Rome, there were two paths for new laws. Sulla, as consul, could only introduce bills to the Senate, and the Senate, consisting of very respected people, would never pass this law. But Sulpicius is a people's tribune, and he can propose laws to the popular assembly, where all citizens of Rome vote by tribes. You'd think the law couldn't pass there, right? Romans wouldn't vote to strip themselves of their own rights. Yes, but Publius Sulpicius has a plan. First, he needs a strong ally, someone with sufficient weight, position, and popularity in Rome, someone with a huge fortune, someone who can help push the law through the popular assembly. Meet Gaius Marius, unprecedented 6-time consul of Rome, including 5 times in a row, an absolutely unheard of situation in the Republic's history. Conqueror of the terrible Germans, army reformer, the man who saved the city from barbarian invasion and was called the third founder of Rome. Without any exaggeration, he's now the first man in Rome. But here's the thing, he's not pure-blooded Roman, a representative of rural aristocracy from the town of Arpinum. He was what they called homo novus, a new man. His ancestors never reached the heights of Roman politics and never aspired to them. And Marius himself in his youth was just pulling soldier's duty and broke through thanks to military talents and marriage to a girl from the ancient Julian family. Marius was fabulously wealthy. By marrying Julia, he helped the proud but poor patricians maintain relative financial stability. Basically, he bought himself a bride. And yes, his wife is the aunt of that very Julius Caesar. 10 years ago, almost immediately after defeating the Germans, Marius was forced to step back from the forefront of Roman politics due to some unfortunate political decisions and the old aristocracy's hatred for the new man. Now he's 70 years old. Now he's a private citizen and simple senator. But he has ambitions and money. He wants to step forward again to the front of Roman politics and go to war, a just war against the city's new terrible enemy, basically to permanently stamp his name in Rome's history. In the East, the last great king of the Greek world, Mithridates of Pontus, is expanding. For the last 15 years, he's been trying to expand his kingdom's borders and regularly banging his head against the wall. He captures neighboring kingdoms, then is forced to give them up under pressure from Rome and start over. And finally, luck smiled on him. The social war began, and Rome simply didn't have forces to send against him. King Mithridates invaded the Roman province of Asia and defeated the local governor's troops. In a short time, he conquered it, and all of Rome's client states in that region, increasing his kingdom of Pontus's territory several times over. Pontus is in the north of modern Turkey, roughly from Sinope to Trabzon, and Mithridates captured plus or minus all of Turkey's territory, Crimea, and the rest of the northern Black Sea region. The local population almost everywhere greets him as a liberator. Roman tax collectors had bled the province dry, turning debtors into slaves, and literally everyone hated them. But simple hatred isn't enough for Mithridates. He wants to completely bind the population of the captured territories to himself and burn all bridges, and the king figured out how to do it. This event entered history as the Asiatic Vespers. By the king's order, in almost all cities, simultaneously beatings and murders of Romans and Italics began. They killed everyone: men, women, children, freedmen, slaves. They killed in the streets, in homes, and in temples. In one day, about 80,000 people were slaughtered. Moreover, they were forbidden even to bury them, so bodies were simply thrown into huge piles outside the cities. Almost all of Asia was covered with terrible mounds of corpses. The terrible irony is that Mithridates made no distinction between Romans and Italics. While civil war raged in Rome under the slogan, "Who's the real Roman here?" the rest of the world made no difference between them. Rome is furious. Consul Sulla naturally receives command of the army in the campaign against Mithridates. Technically, not only consuls could wage wars. Wars were waged by governors. The same war with Mithridates was started by the local governor, and ex-consuls if their command was extended. That is, a consul receives command in war, goes to it, and if he doesn't manage to resolve matters in a year, which happens quite often, but conducts the war successfully, his command can be extended for the next year. But if the war was difficult, like ours now, if new troops were sent from Rome rather than recruited in the province, then these new troops were led by a new consul. To gather money for the war, impoverished Rome reaches even into temple sanctuaries. The need for money was so great that they even took the untouchable gold reserve that the semi-legendary king of Rome, Numa Pompilius, had placed in one of the temples 600 years before for the darkest day. Apparently, it had arrived. But times had changed. Inflation and all that. If in Numa's time this gold probably would have been enough to gather an army and conquer half of Europe, well, now it's a drop in the ocean. All the collected funds were enough for only 6 incomplete legions, composed of soldiers Sulla had commanded the previous year. Meanwhile, Sulpicius rubs his hands. His time has come. During the election campaign, he suddenly discovered a taste for club dictatorship. He increasingly likes using populist slogans and force. And honestly, he has no other choice. Sulpicius begins actively recruiting supporters. In the poor and hungry Rome, he suddenly has a lot of money. And very soon he's surrounded by a squad of 3,000 friends, armed with clubs and stones. He also attracted about 600 young supporters from the equestrian order. This is the order right before senators, those who engaged in business activity in Rome. Senators were forbidden such things. He openly opposes the Senate, calls his followers the anti-Senate, and his political program has 3 points. Point 1. Return the exiles under the Varian law. Before the social war, a large number of supporters of granting citizenship rights to Italics were exiled from Rome. Not that important, really. Point 2. Fair distribution of Italics and freedmen among the 35 original Roman tribes. Sulpicius understood that Italics couldn't help pass this law, but equalizing freedmen's rights with Roman citizens would help increase his supporter base here and now, that is, in Rome itself. Obviously, there's a huge number of freedmen in the city. And point 3. Prohibits senators from having debts greater than 2,000 denarii. This is the main silver coin. They'll circulate through Europe all through the Middle Ages and get many local names. Penny, pfennig, denier, a ridiculous sum for those times. But the social war is still ongoing. Senators were directly forbidden from engaging in commercial activity, which, interestingly, lending money was allowed. It wasn't considered commercial activity. But the financial system of ancient Rome is a whole separate big conversation. Most senators received income from land, but now, after civil war, when Italy lies in ruins. Moreover, landed property is an asset that's not easy to sell tomorrow. It's very illiquid. After all, money is always needed, especially by Roman politicians. Most senators had quite sufficient wealth to pay off all debts, and they'd have money left for the senatorial census. But doing this relatively quickly was simply impossible. In short, everyone had estates, villas, and loans, and technically, you could sell an estate to pay off all loans, but you couldn't sell it quickly. Literal fulfillment of the third point would lead to the already thinned Senate during the war from its supposed 300 members turning into a handful, at best, maybe 40 to 50 people, those whose wealth wasn't concentrated in Italy. For example, people like Gaius Marius, who received his huge income from silver mines in Spain. Of course, the bills had no chance of passing a vote, despite all the freedmen's support. Remember, even all of them together could only give 4 votes from the urban tribes, though the idea of properly squeezing senators' tails was close to many Romans' hearts. But first, senators also had many supporters and clients, and second, taking away Roman citizens' last remnants of exclusivity over other italics and former slaves would be difficult. But Sulpicius has an idea how to achieve the desired decision. He has Marius and his popularity in the city. He has Marius's money and old veterans who love him and will follow him against anything. Well, and there's his company of friends. But you can't just come to a vote with a club-armed crowd and demand passage of your laws, can you? Or can you? Sulpicius waits until Sulla leaves for the troops besieging one of the Italics' last strongholds, and introduces the bills for consideration in the tribal assembly, that is, the popular assembly. Discussion of the bills flares up in the city, and it's conducted quite vigorously in the forum. Romans' favorite entertainment, political discussions. Usually discussions on such matters are a wonderful spectacle. Orators speak criticizing or supporting the law. You can argue with someone until you're hoarse. You can get money for supporting the law. You can even start a fight. In general, politics is very interesting. But this time, everything was somewhat more unique. Sulpicius's friends practically occupied the forum and beat all dissenters with clubs. Unrest begins in the city, and Publius, with his company, conducts voter outreach, explaining exactly how to vote. Sulla hurriedly arrives in Rome, and he and co-consul Rufus face a dilemma. What to do? Passing these laws would mean that Sulpicius essentially usurps power, at least this year, and reduces the Senate to an auxiliary body, and next year there'll be elections, where all Italics and freedmen distributed among tribes will vote. And guess who they'll be grateful to? The Republic, as it was yesterday, could end tomorrow. All politics in the city will be determined by Italics and former slaves. Most members will be expelled from the Senate, and people's tribunes, demagogues essentially, will usurp power, and by brute force. Something must be done, urgently. You can't bring the army into Rome under any conditions or circumstances. The army can be in the city only if it's under siege or preparing for a triumph, but even then it's quartered somewhat away from the forum on the Campus Martius. This is law. Breaking it means invoking all Rome's righteous anger on the consuls' heads. Then Sulpicius will pass any laws without any clubs. There's no National Guard, police, or riot squad. Hire your own thugs? First, with what money? And second, competing with Marius's bottomless wallet is impossible anyway. Sulla, of course, set aside something from last campaign, but he's still very poor, and all senators are in debt. Risk it and try to win? Too great a risk. In the past, there have been precedents when such pressure worked, and in the bright heads of our consuls arises what seems to them a sensible idea. They declare the coming days non-working. Holidays. Legally, they had the authority for this. What exactly they were planning to celebrate isn't very clear. But something else is clear. On holidays, all public activity stops, including convening assemblies to pass new laws. Checkmate, Comrade Sulpicius. You ask, what's the point here? After all, if they wanted to stop him in disorder, then cornering Sulpicius and depriving him of an exit isn't the most sensible idea. Not quite. Forcing consuls to cancel holidays by brute force, now that's violence against the Republic. Gaius Marius and Sulpicius might not dare escalate the situation to the limit. Besides, by killing consuls, they might destroy their reputations, and many of their supporters might turn away from them. And then the law shouldn't pass, despite any threats. It's a very big risk. While clubs in the forum, beating dissenters, and pressure on voters are ugly things, but technically, it works. And we'll definitely go in another episode to look, for example, at Saturninus's rebellion and see in detail how this works. You can push through law passage by such methods. and afterward the law can't be declared passed under pressure and therefore invalid. Elections happened. Yes, there were violations, electoral anomalies, voting irregularities. Well, results are announced, and that's it. The law takes effect. To repeal it, the same popular assembly, but convened under new rules, would need to repeal these laws. And italics. Freedmen distributed among all tribes, of course, won't allow this. You probably say now, what about the Senate? After all, the Senate can also pass laws. Yes, it can. But Sulpicius is a people's tribune, and a people's tribune has veto power. The right to impose a ban on passage of any law by the Senate. Technically, Sulpicius wasn't the only people's tribune, and any other people's tribune could veto Sulpicius's bills. But obviously, this particular year, the other people's tribunes either feared too much for their lives or were bought with the same Marius money. Of course, the consuls understood that Sulpicius had no way out, and he'd pushed to the limit. So they announce a meeting in the Forum, mobilizing all opponents of Publius's bills. Sulpicius and friends also come there. He demands cancellation of the holidays. A verbal altercation begins, during which Consul Rufus's son, married to Sulla's daughter by the way, stupidly provoked Sulpicius's supporters. A fight breaks out. Pompey Rufus's son is killed. The fight turns into a massacre. Pompey himself hid, and Sulla is pursued by a mob. Technically, you could die for the glory of the Republic, and then Publius and Marius would have problems, but, well, you understand. Sulla flees and finds refuge in Gaius Marius's house. Sulpicius's people are Marius's electorate, plus armed with his money. It was the safest place from the rioters, plus located nearby. And Marius himself, well, not so long ago they were allies and even friends. Sulla for many years was Marius's right hand. They fought together against Numidians and Germans, according to some information that personally seems logical to me. They were even once married to the Julian sisters, so they're something like relatives. Yes, since Sulla began emerging from Marius's shadow, a crack appeared in their relationship, which then became a chasm. There can be only one first man in Rome. Marius assures Sulla that political power is enough for him. You must cancel the holidays. Then Sulpicius will pass the laws, Italics will vote for me, I'll return to the forefront of Roman politics and become consul for the 7th time. I'll wipe the nose of senatorial aristocracy, strengthen my position as Rome's first man, and I won't let Sulpicius establish a club dictatorship. The Republic will be safe, and you go to the troops and set off for war with Mithridates. There you'll get rich and return with your own piece of glory. You don't threaten my position. We have nothing to divide between us, and if you refuse, well, I'll have no choice. And then I'll blame everything on Sulpicius. He'll be guilty that the mob killed a consul. I'm completely uninvolved from all sides. Lord, I even gave you shelter in my house. And the consuls cancel the holidays. Sulpicius can pass his bills, and Sulla leaves Rome whole and unharmed. He goes to his army and prepares for the campaign against Mithridates. But Marius deceived Sulla. Publius Sulpicius introduces 4 bills. In the 4th, he proposes to the popular assembly to revoke the powers of the consul of the Roman Republic and transfer command in the campaign against Mithridates to the only worthy one, the most glorious commander, 3rd founder of Rome, Gaius Marius. You can't say this is unprecedented. But in all known Roman history, cases where consuls were deprived of their sacred right to lead armies to war can be counted on one hand. Of course, Sulla wasn't stupid, and understood that Marius and Sulpicius might, emboldened by success, try to deprive him of command. But the only thing he could do to prevent them was leave. Leave for the troops. Sitting in Rome, he'd achieve nothing. He lost in the city. And yes, Club Terror and Marius's electoral base worked. All 4 bills were approved and became law. Sulla must lay down command and return to the city, humiliated and defeated, having lost everything. He must forever leave the political arena, despite all his merits, literally. You ask, did Marius and Sulpicius understand that by cornering Sulla they were depriving him of choice when he actually has an army? Of course they understood. But no one could imagine what would happen next. These weren't Caesar's times yet. Then, leading legions against Rome was simply unthinkable. There aren't enough words to describe the degree of blasphemy and sacrilege of this act. It's impossible. No Roman in Rome's almost 700-year history had ever done anything like this. It never even occurred to anyone. Actually, Marius made this possible. Yes, him specifically. Before Marius's reforms, the army consisted only of wealthy citizens who bought their own weapons and armor, but they didn't depend on the commander. He only managed them on the battlefield and divided spoils according to clearly defined principles. Soldiers received no salary, and after war they returned home to their property. They didn't personally depend on the commander. Well, except for their lives on the battlefield. After Marius's reform, the legions began recruiting representatives of the last class of Roman society, propertyless citizens called proletarians. The state assigned them salaries, gave them weapons, the cost of which, by the way, was deducted from salaries, but they depended specifically on the commander. He gave them money, he distributed spoils, and after discharge, he secured land for them. Until the very end of service, and even after, they depended on him. If the commander was good and loved by soldiers, they were ready to follow him even to hell. And Sulla was one of the best in all Roman history. Undoubtedly, he himself didn't believe, or didn't fully believe, in the success of his plan. But after what Marius did to him, he had no choice. The second consul, Pompey Rufus, flees to Sulla, and a funny situation arises. Technically, Sulla and Rufus rule Rome. Actually, they're far in the south, and one of them is about to lose his army. By the way, who rules Rome? And what does the Senate think about all this? Well, it's simple. Here, the Senate is angry, and its heart and soul on Sulla's side, but it can do absolutely nothing. Any legislative resistance runs into Sulpicius's veto right, and any forceful resistance is useless against Marius, and the same Sulpicius. Sulla convenes a soldier assembly. It's not hard to imagine what he said then. People's tribune Sulpicius and Gaius Marius have established a dictatorship in Rome through terror and violence. Their people beat my supporters and killed my colleague consul's son, my daughter's husband. The Rome you know no longer exists. The Republic has fallen, seized by tyrants. Tyrants who for their ambitions trampled all laws of the sacred Republic. The Italics who killed your friends and brothers. Those you've been fighting all this time have been made equal to citizens of Rome. Now, they'll choose consuls and commanders. I, your commander, have been stripped of command. A consul of Rome now means nothing. I won't lead you to war against Mithridates. Marius, that's who's going to war. But he won't take you, my soldiers. He'll recruit a new army from his veterans and lead them to seize Mithridates' wealth and gold. And me? I must submit and lay down command. Here are 2 military tribunes, and they'll read you the message from Tribune Sulpicius and Senator Gaius Marius. Sulla steps down from the platform and two tribunes find themselves face to face with a sea of angry soldiers. As you understand, they didn't read further than, Lucius Cornelius Sulla must lay down command. First one stone flies from the crowd, then a second, and soon a whole hail. And now the legionaries also have no way back. They just killed inviolable tribunes who came to announce the message of the Senate and people of Rome. At best, it's decimation, killing every 10th man by lot. At worst, execution for all. The soldiers shout to Sulla that they won't tolerate orders from tyrants, that Sulla is their commander, and he must lead them to Rome. Sulla's most noble officers are in shock. They can't and won't participate in such sacrilege, and most of them leave the army. Sulla doesn't stop them, but commands his soldiers to break camp and march on Rome. The only representatives of the senatorial class of Rome who remained with him are co-consul Pompey Rufus and quaestor Lucius Licinius Lucullus. Also, an incredibly interesting personality we'll definitely talk about. If Pompey thirsts for revenge for his son's murder, then Lucullus is simply loyal to Sulla and will follow him to the end.
And what was happening in Rome?
At first, no one could believe it. Lord, it's easier to believe the sun will now rise in the west. But reality quickly clarifies, and panic reigns in Rome. Rome doesn't have a single legion that could rush to defend the city. The Senate, which before was outraged by Sulpicius and Marius and fully approved of Sulla, is now enraged by this sacrilege just like the rest of the city. They immediately send an embassy to Sulla of 2 praetors. That's the office right before consul. Well, basically, the chief magistrates left in the city. The consuls are leading an army against Rome after all. Under the leadership of Marius's main ally in the Senate, Marcus Junius Brutus. And yes, this is the father of that Brutus, and this is the worst choice imaginable. He's not only Marius's closest ally, he's also Sulla's worst enemy. And so, he didn't start negotiations on quite the right tone. He arrived, like his colleague, surrounded by bodyguard lictors who in Rome accompanied magistrates for protection and respectability. Yes, these are the same lictors who carried fasces, bundles of rods which subsequently came to symbolize unity and which Benito Mussolini made the main symbol of fascism. Anyway, if Brutus behaved arrogantly and haughtily, and the lictors around him proudly displayed axes stuck in fasces, a symbol that the magistrate came for punishment, and generally he's the main force here, then Sulla behaved calmly and with restraint, which can't be said about his legionaries. After Sulla, when asked why he's marching with an army against his country, answered that he's going to free it from tyrants, he gently pushed Brutus aside and proceeded further. But the legionaries weren't so shy and gave the Senate's envoys a good beating.
Marius and Sulpicius hastily arm their supporters and prepare to repel the battle-hardened troops. If the venture initially seems doomed to fail, that's not quite true. The foundation, center, and main fighting force of Sulpicius's movement were Marius's veterans. There might not have been many, but in the past they're the same legionaries who went through many military campaigns, and the whole city stood behind them. The Senate continued sending embassy after embassy to Sulla. The last, 4th one, met him already on the city's near approaches. The senators spoke softly and begged, literally implored Sulla to stop. They swore the Senate voted to restore Sulla's legal rights, that no one vetoed this. They begged Sulla not to approach the city closer than 5 miles, not to commit sacrilege, and not to cross the city's sacred boundaries, the Pomerium, with weapons in hand. Sulla agreed, and ordered immediate marking of space for a camp. As soon as the envoys withdrew, Sulla sent 2 detachments to capture the Esquiline gates. Could he have acted differently? After all, the Senate promised. Of course not. If you dance with the devil, dance to the end. They won't forgive Sulla for what he did.
No one. Ever. They'll exile him, destroy him. They'll simply kill him. And so Sulla stands on the other side of the Esquiline gates. He's clad in armor, and behind him are his troops. He gives the order. And for the first time in Rome's almost 700-year existence, Roman legions storm the Eternal City. Residents immediately bombard the legionaries from nearby roofs with tiles, garbage, stones, and force them to retreat to the wall. Sulla promises, one more stone, and soldiers will start setting houses on fire. The hail of tiles and stones stops, but the roar of hatred continues to deafen. Sulla leaves one legion to guard the gates, sends a second under Pompey Rufus's command to occupy the gates leading north from where reinforcements could theoretically come, and another to retreat to the wooden bridge across the Tiber. He himself, at the head of 2 legions, enters the Esquiline Forum. Here he meets Marius and Sulpicius's militia. Battle erupts. Behind Marius's veterans and citizens stands all of Rome. Sulla's soldiers acutely feel the city's hatred and the sacrilege of their act. They waver, and, despite all their training, Sulla's troops falter. But Sulla is a commander who received the grass crown. This crown can't be received for smart thoughts, planning, and calculations sitting aside from battle. It's given only to one who, by personal bravery and valor, in the heat of battle, saves the army. Sulla sends a detachment around the flank and throws himself into the thick of the fight. He draws the legionaries after him. They'll follow their commander, even to hell. Forces equalize again, but when the reinforcements sent around come out behind the Marians, they flee. Marius, in desperate appeal, offers slaves freedom if they help defend Rome, but it's useless. Sulpicius, Marius, and several allies flee the city. Sulla, of course, doesn't stop them. Exiling from the city is one thing, but cutting off the head of Rome's 3rd founder is quite another. And so Sulla stands in the middle of the city, covered in blood after battle, hated by all citizens. What has he just done? Saved or destroyed the Republic?